Hello, thank you for joining us. We're just allowing just a couple of moments for more people to join us before we talk about a few notes on webinar etiquette. Just a few points to note here. Attendees will be muted during this webinar. You can use the chat feature in Zoom to post questions and communicate with the host. If you prefer to voice a question, please use the raised hand feature and you will be unmuted. This webinar is being recorded and we will post an archive of the webinar on our YouTube channel. The link will be shared via email along with the slide deck and any resource pages from the speakers. To view the slide deck and panelists side by side, please refer to the top control panel at the top of your screen. There is a drop list of settings. Click on side by side mode to see the speakers and slides simultaneously. And with that, I turn it over to Deb Petermann.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Deb Petermann. I'm with the Center for Disability Empowerment. I am a transition coordinator, community connector. I'm also a sibling to a person with a disability. The Center for Disability Empowerment is a community-based residential, non-residential center for living that is driven by choice and direction of people with disabilities. We provide supports and resources for people with disabilities in order for them to be participants and contributors in their communities as they live, learn, work, worship, and play alongside with people without disabilities. Tonight's lifespan of a sibling panel will share their lived experiences of being a sibling to a person or persons with disabilities. This unique panel will share the impact that those sibs have had on their adult life that may include education, marital status, chosen occupation, guardianship, and even ongoing care once their parents have passed away. It is something special when we meet another sibling. We have a common bond that grows as we share our stories. Typical people are sometimes baffled by what I think is a funny sibling story. To me, it is healing to share even an absurd story and know their sibling may have a clue about what I'm talking about. Most siblings have shared empathy, grace, and most often have laughed with me. Some of our stories are not told until we meet another sibling of a person with disability. We have 7 wonderful panel members who have come prepared to answer some basic questions about their personal experiences. We will honor our siblings who may have had physical disabilities, developmental disabilities, and mental health disabilities. There is no right or wrong answer. It is what it is. Our siblings' lives continue to impact us, whether they are young or may have already passed away. We are who we are because of them. So I would like to introduce my co-host, Barbara Sapharas. And while she's getting ready, I'm going to share a little bit about her. Barbara is a sibling and has worked in the IDD field for 45 years. She is the Ohio ambassador for the Charting the Life course, the Nexus team member, Nexus team member Charting the Life course at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, former chair and board member for the Sibling Leadership Network. She is a friend to people with disabilities, and she is a friend of mine. Go ahead, Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deb, and thank you all for joining us. This is so exciting. We'd like to know a little bit about who chose to spend the evening with us. So we'd ask you to answer this poll. And I'm going to keep going. Please vote. So a little bit about the valued role of siblings. As Deb said, most of us have not shared our experiences as a sibling until we meet someone. And it became so clear to me working in the field that when I disclosed I was a sibling, I often had someone coming up to me very quietly going, "So am I." And they were coworkers. Some were coworkers I never knew they had brothers and sisters with disabilities. So I share one of my favorite pictures from when we were little. I'm 6. My brother Jim is 3.5. And oh, great. Nice. So we have lots of family members in the group. That's awesome. Thank you so much. And my brother Nick, who had a developmental disability, is about 1.5 years. I love this picture because even at 6, I already know my role. I am holding on to Jim for dear life. My mother must have told me, take care of your brothers, make sure they're okay. And my brother Jim had an acquired disability as a result of an accident. So some things to remember. Most of us will tell you that we have many roles in our lives, throughout our lives. We choose what those roles will be, but we also know that it's important to, as for families, to include siblings. And professionals, when you talk about families, we know you're talking about parents. You hardly ever include siblings in your conversation. So it's important to include siblings because if you include everyone in the family, we improve the quality of life of that entire family. In Charting the Life course, we say that everyone exists in the context of a family. And family is defined by the person, whether it's biological or chosen. And many siblings may not live close to their brother or sister, but they still have a very active, supportive role. So at one point, I lived 60 miles from Nick, and people, his team would be like, "You live far away." And I'm like, "You never heard of a telephone? I can be there in 1 hour. I can drive the freeway and I can be there in 1 hour. If something needs to happen, I can be there in 1 hour." We also, the Sibling Leadership Network, which is an international nonprofit that supports adults that who have brothers and sisters with any disability, not just developmental, often referred to siblings as the club sandwich generation. We often may be supporting our parents, the generation above us, our children, our generation, and our siblings, and then our children, the generation below us. And we know that siblings say what they really need from an early age is information, preparation, what's coming next, what's going to happen next, and support. In Charting the Life course, families have said they need 3 buckets of support. We need information to get through our day. So how many of us as siblings really knew a lot? How many of us looked for information on our own? I remember as a preteen going to a bookmobile because we didn't live by a library. And I saw a book that said cerebral palsy, and I reached for it and took it down, and the librarian ran over and said, "Honey, you can't read that book. It's above your head. You can only get books below your head, like your head and lower." And she said, "That's not really for you." And I said, "I know what this is. I have a brother with cerebral palsy. I can read it." Little did I know that when I was in grad school, I read the same textbook for one of my courses. I know. I was like, this sounds awful familiar. A different version, an updated version. We also need goods and services to help our brothers and sisters. And we also need to be able to connect with other people who have a similar lived experience. So I just have up here that the Department of Developmental Disabilities does have several closed Facebook pages for families to connect. Also, the Sibling Leadership Network has a closed Facebook page called SibNet, and there's about 5,000 adult siblings from all over the world. And as Deb said, it's a place where you don't have to explain everything, you're not judged, and you can be honest. So why should we be involved in our future planning and now planning? First of all, we're affected by the lives of our brothers and sisters. And siblings are the longest relationship we have in our life. It's longer than your spouse. It's longer than with your parents. And we're also influential. So maybe some of us will share stories of how we influenced our siblings, as only siblings can. And we also know that we assume very important roles all throughout our lifespan. But every family and every sibling is different. Every sibling should choose what they want their role to be. So from the beginning, we're probably one of the first teachers. How many of you set your brother or sister down and said, look, this is an elephant, say elephant. This is green, this is blue. And we were told to do that. Go read to your brother or sister, go teach them, whatever. We protected them. So I'm not going to ask you how many of you had to stick up for or support your sibling when they were picked on. And quite honestly, maybe you were called names as a sibling, because I know I was. Oh, you have that blank brother, you're a blank too. So we were abused verbally. We're also their champion and advocate. I know throughout my brother's life, I would stick up for him, even with my mother. Oh, Mom, he's an adult, he can make that decision. And she'd be like, ah! We provided comfort. We teased each other. That's the normal sibling relationship. You know, I could never hit my brother because he used a wheelchair, and my mother would have killed me if I hit him. So the worst I could do was kick the tire on his wheelchair. When I got mad at him, he could say anything he wanted and never got in trouble. But, you know, I had to be careful. But we also have secrets with our brothers and sisters and shared experiences. Both of my brothers have passed, and the one thing I miss the most is not being able to say, oh my God, remember when we saw that movie together, or we watched that show, or we went and did this, or remember when we pulled a fast one on Mom. We're also the firsts. So this is my brother, Nick. He is 3 years old. Yes, it is Christmas. We are at my grandmother's house, and every day he had to have physical therapy and stand in his standing table with, if you can see, he's got metal braces on that went from his shoe heel up to his waist. He is dressed to the nines for Christmas. We are at my grandmother's house, which means that table went with us so he could stand in that standing table. I'm amazed he didn't just tell us what we could do with that standing table. But we're the firsts. We're the first friend, we're the first playmate, and we're the first teacher. We also may be caregivers, and that caregiving may vary by need. So we may actually do hands-on daily living supports. My brother needed total support, so I never shared with my friends that I bathed Nick or fed him or dressed him. What would other girls think if I said, oh, I'm dressing my brother who's only 4 years younger than me? We may go to medical appointments. We may be the one that they can vent with. And sometimes we take over that caregiving role as our parents age, or we take over that supportive decision-making role. And we are uniquely qualified to be champions. I mean, every time I meet a sibling, all I say is nothing phases us. We have so much resilience. It's like, been there, done that. We have to problem solve all the time because we woke up in the morning never knowing what that day was going to look like. We're loyal to a fault. I protected my brother. My brother couldn't move very much. He could move some fingers on his left hand, and somehow my brother, not at home, but at school, must have learned about flipping the bird. And when my brother got mad, he would flip that bird. And if my mother yelled at him and I was with him and she was in another room, she would say, did your brother just move his finger? And I'd be like, no, Mom, he didn't do anything. And then I'd look at him and say, Nick, you owe me big time. I saved your butt. So we're loyal. How many times have we had to sit and explain things to our brother or sister in ways they understood? When Nick was dying, I explained all of his options, and I made sure he made his decision about how he wanted to live the rest of his life. But we also know the culture that our siblings grew up in and the values. So we grew up in a Greek American home, and that was very important to Nick. And we're also very patient. I mean, how long did you wait for your brother or sister to complete a sentence in a way you understood? For those of you that have brothers and sisters that communicated clearly. But there's always two sides. Our parents were worried about burdening us. We don't want to worry you. It's not your responsibility. And that's why we say siblings have to decide for themselves what they're going to do. So here's some information from a study that was done by Katie Arnold and Tamar Heller and John Kramer, all siblings. At the time they did this, they all worked at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And look at what we need. We need support. We need information. We need information about future planning. So I have had the privilege of knowing, I'll call them the godfathers of the sibling support movement. There were two godfathers, and I say that in a loving, loving way. One was Tom Fish, who worked at the Nysanger Center at the Ohio State University. And the other was Don Meyer, who was the executive director of the Sibling Support Project in Seattle. And the two of them started groups to support siblings, young siblings, but then they both said the young siblings grew up and they needed just as much support as adults. So I was part of a group of people who started Sibling Leadership Network with Don and Tom. I also was privileged to work with Tom to start the Ohio Sibs and the nonprofit. So Don interviewed a lot of siblings and said, what do you want your parents to know, and what do you want professionals to know about siblings? As no surprise, we want our own life. We want our concerns to be acknowledged. We want to have normal expectations. So how many of you felt that you had to be the good sib? You had to be the achiever. You had to do everything. You didn't cause any problems because your parents had enough to deal with. But also, how many of you were like, how come my parents don't make my brother or sister do stuff? We wanted to feel safe. We want to be with other sibs and get information. We want to share our concerns. We wanted to just be, not just be girls, the daughters, but also the sons. And we also want one-on-one time with parents. So how many of us, our parents couldn't go to our programs or our games or our shows because who's going to take care of your brother? Who are we going to leave him with? We also respect our parents' perspective. None of us understands what it's like to be a parent. And I will never tell a sibling that I understand their life. I may understand their stories and laugh at them because I'll be like, oh yeah, been there, done that. And we need to learn more about the life as a sib. The first time I was asked by an agency that supported Nick in the Cleveland, Ohio area to speak at one of their staff in-service days on being a sibling. And I said, what? No one had ever asked me or even thought of it. And I was like, you're kidding. Why do you want me to talk about that? But it led to wonderful opportunities. So again, including brothers and sisters on advisory boards. And actually that speaking engagement led to me being included on an advisory board and then on the board of that agency. So there are many books written about siblings. Here's one, Riding the Bus with My Sister. But what we need to do, what siblings want, is to be engaged in those conversations, to be included and supporting our brothers and sisters to make decisions, and also to be included in future planning conversations. We also need to recognize as siblings, I'm also a trainer in person-centered thinking. And one core belief that we have in person-centered thinking is every person with a disability, every family has experienced trauma. And we need to recognize that part of our life has been trauma, whether we recognize it as trauma or not. So just to give you some things to think about, the system. How many times have our parents had to retell the story? How many times have you as a sibling, if you're advocating with your brother or sister, have had to retell the story? How comfortable, what do you think it does to our parents to have to relive the moment they heard that diagnosis? That is traumatic. Being treated as a number. For siblings, not being seen, not being heard. You know, the focus was always on our brother or sister. Failure to ensure our own emotional safety. That I did not have that experience, but I have met several siblings who didn't feel safe in their own home. They were, their brothers or sisters were abusive in many different ways. So we have all experienced trauma. The trauma I keep remembering is when Nick was being made fun of. As a sister, it was also blamed. I was blamed. You know, you are too, because your brother is. So some things to think about. Thank you for the opportunity to just give a quick overview of why the sibling role is important to our families. And I will stop sharing. And Deb?
Yeah, so as we wait for Jamie to, let's see, share the screen. Give us a moment. Barbara, thank you so much for sharing these things. There's so many things that you bring up that, you know, I haven't thought of, and maybe some of us at have been impacted by. So Jamie, if you would get the slide starting panel, about our panel. Well, in the meantime, while we're waiting, I'm just going to go ahead and tell my funny story. We'll just start it that way and go backwards. So my funny story didn't happen really until I was about 36 years old. And we just lost our mother. And I was a sibling that was a good daughter, so I became really enmeshed with my mom, with the people pleasing and all that thing that gives us good kudos and strokes. And so when she passed away, I decided to go to counseling. And you know, after you share about basic life of growing up, where you live, you know, your mistakes, I remember my counselor sitting back and seriously saying, "You have a high tolerance for inappropriate behavior." And I started laughing. I thought it was the funniest thing I ever heard. You know, I wondered, was it because I grew up in New York? Was it because of my brother or my bad choices or working in Manhattan? But it's true, I do. And I want to give props to my brother because he has taught me how to hang out with about anyone. So I use that line about high tolerance for inappropriate behavior when I talk with parents who are so concerned that their child is going to be disruptive or have an outburst. I always say that so I can encourage them to be rest assured that it is okay. All right, Jamie, are you ready? I can just picture her scurrying. Maybe I ought to.
Give me just 1 second and I've got it here. I am so sorry. I had downloaded the wrong PowerPoint. Let's see here.
Just about above that. Keep going. Nope, keep going. Keep going. All the about a panel. There's 4 of them.
Oh.
4 or 5. Okay. So thank you, Jamie. So thank you, Barb, for what you talked about. And let's talk about our panel tonight. We have 7 panel members. 6 are female, 1 male. Lucky him. We have 8 siblings with disabilities represented by the panel. 3 are deceased. All of us are older than our siblings on this panel. I found that interesting. And one panel member has 3 siblings with disabilities. Our family, in our own family of origin, we had 2 to 5 children in our family. The type of sibling disabilities represented are developmental, intellectual, physical, learning disabilities, and mental health. Our total years of life experiences being a sibling on this panel is 225 years and counting. The school history of our siblings with disabilities represent from 1963 to present. One of our siblings will graduate this year of 2021. I find this number interesting because many of the disability advances due to advocacy and laws happen starting really, a lot of it started when President John F. Kennedy made people aware of people with developmental disability. But a lot of the advocacy and movement was happening in the early 70s. 2 of our panel members are single, 1 is widowed, and 4 are married. 3 of our panel members have a child with a disability. This is just, many of us described our personal relationships with our siblings that ranged from very close to limited due to underlying issues with safety and mental health concern. Most admit to experiencing trauma related to the sibling with a disability. Most admit that their sibling impacted major decisions in their life. And all wanted to share their personal journey tonight to possibly impact the journey of other siblings. So I thank you, panel, for joining us. So our next slide. So you've already met Barbara. I wrote age 68 just because I did say in our flyer almost 70. I think I just didn't have the nerve to ask you, Barbara, how old you were.
I'm 67, but thank you for putting me up a year.
And so here's a picture of Barb with her 2 brothers. Next slide. Oh, Barb, you could tell us your funny story.
Okay, so here's a funny story. So I always went to Nick's meetings because my mother told me, you're in the field, you understand this, you can start going to the meetings. And I said, Nick, is that okay? And he said, yes. And my mother gave me a folder. It's yours, Barb. Oh, thanks, Mom. So one day I went to pick him up from camp. He went to Camp Cheerful in Cleveland. And they, I went to his meeting, that's it. And they said, we have a goal for Nick. He wants to learn how to read better. And so we're gonna have him read and answer questions to improve his comprehension. Well, my brother graduated from high school. So I freaked out. And after his meeting, we always went to dinner. So I said, Nick, please explain to me why they're going to have you read 2 sentences and then tell them what you read when you went to high school. And he goes, sis, the lady who assessed me is new. She just graduated from college. I figured I would act like I didn't understand. And in a couple of months, I'll show her that I can read and understand, and she'll feel good that she taught me so much. And I just went, oh. So that was my funny.
That's great. But you wonder what were some of his thoughts in his life.
She was pretty. She was pretty, and my brother always liked to flirt with the pretty girls.
So did mine. Oh boy, Kathy's going to tell a story. So our next panel is my sister, Cathay Chester, and she's 65. So Cathy, do you want to share your funny story?
I can. When I first met my husband and before we got married, I wanted him to meet our brother. And so we had an opportunity to do that when the group homes where they were living in Columbus had gotten together for a Christmas party. And I told my husband, I said, all right, you have to watch him work the room. And I said, he knows how to bat his eyes. He has known since he was a little kid how to just show off those baby blues. And he knew how to flirt from a very young age. And so we went to this event and he watched Rodney go to every woman pretty much in the room that he knew to get cake and coffee and refills and more cake. And my husband says to me, oh my gosh, you were right. He's very skilled at it. And he knew how to work and flirt from a very young age to get what he wanted. Even our mom had mentioned that. even with his teachers.
Yes, I remember him working the room. Very good at it.
Yep.
Okay. So the next slide. So as you see, we're sharing the same picture. That's because I think all of our sibling pictures were on the bottom pile of boxes. But this is one of my favorite pictures of Rodney. Rodney was a coffee and soda thief. So as he got older, he learned to do it faster and he wore it a lot on his shirt. So as you see, he's got a lot of stains there. But I remember looking at this picture and I saying, okay, now I can die. I finally have a picture of my brother actually looking at the camera and smiling. So this picture brings me joy. Next slide. So we want to meet Elaine Hamilton, who's age 54. And Elaine has several siblings that she is going to share tonight. So Elaine, do you want to tell us some of your funny stories, since you've got 3?
Well, I don't really have a funny story. I think we were all ornery and we had a good time as children. We didn't have much, but we made the best of it. Sometimes we fought, most of the time we played. Don't really have one single funny story. There were 6 of us in all, so there was a lot of us. So not really one funny story that I can single out at this time.
Well, if something comes to mind later, please share it. Okay, next slide. I want you to meet Nikki Montgomery, who's 43. And Nikki, here's some great pictures of you with your sibling. Why don't you go ahead and share us a funny story?
Okay. The one I thought of is I used to babysit my siblings. My siblings are 6, 8, and 10 years younger than I am. And my sister Siobhan, who you see in the picture, was 8 years younger. So we had a younger brother who was the youngest. And it was around probably she was 4 or 3 and she was potty training and was sitting in the bathroom on her little special potty seat. And I hear like rustling coming from the bathroom. And I go in and she has told my younger brother, who was about 3 at the time, to go climb up on top of the fridge in the kitchen, grab the cereal that they knew had a prize in it, and bring it into the bathroom with her so that they could spread the cereal out across the floor, find the prize. And then their plan was to then repackage all of that cereal from the bathroom floor and have him put it back on top of the fridge. And it just exemplifies for me the kind of ringleader she was with my younger siblings. She was in the middle of that younger set, but she always ran the show and always told them what to do. Usually didn't get in as much trouble for it, but definitely always was like giving directions. So she remained that bossy throughout her life. She passed away in 2012 at the age of 27, but in the meantime, you'll see from the pictures, she was able to earn a college degree and start a PhD program. And even the picture there with her in the red cup, I was teasing her about what was in the cup because she used to also sneak and have people put alcohol in her cup.
So funny. Thank you, Nikki. All right, next slide. So I want you to meet Nick Hetrick, and he's age 37 with his brother Micah. So Nick, can you tell us a funny story?
Yeah, thanks. I got a lot of funny stories. Micah's funny. He likes to make people laugh. He likes to be witty. He has great timing. The story I was thinking about, actually, we went to Disney World a couple years ago. Micah loves Disney World. And so we were there with my immediate family, my mom, my brother, my in-laws. And we went to one of these character meals. And it's one of these where, you know, the characters show up at different points and greet people. And at one point we're at the meal and Goofy comes over, and I hope you can see this picture. Goofy comes over and starts sniffing Micah, you know, being a dog or whatever. And Micah kind of looks over at me and then looks back at Goofy and leans over toward Goofy and starts sniffing Goofy. And I don't think Goofy had ever had somebody respond in kind to something like that. Really took him aback. But that, I just feel like that's a really good example of the kind of thing that he would think to do just naturally, but also because he knows it's going to make people laugh. So,
yeah, thank you, Nick. And for our youngest panel, meet Veronica Zielinski. She's 25 years old. And Veronica, can you share a funny story?
Yes, my brother is nonverbal. He uses PECs to communicate, which are little images that he will hand us and let us know what he wants. He was born when I was 4, so we were always around each other as long as I can remember. I did go away to college, a whole 30 minutes away, which was a big transition for us. So when I was away at college, Frank was using his PECs very well, doing a good job. And one day he found a picture of me and he would repeatedly hand it to our mom. And he was requesting me because I was away at school. And of course, it should have worked that way, that he found my picture and he got it immediately. But instead, I would just come back and visit him on the weekends and try to reinforce the idea that he asked for me, so I'm here.
Well, he knows how to use, it's a form of communication, and he got what he wanted.
Exactly, always does.
Yeah, yeah. All right, thank you, panel. So I'm going to have us not share the screen anymore. And so I had given the panel some questions ahead of time for them to consider their thoughts and things they might want to share. And so let's start out, before we talk about your siblings, but let's go ahead and talk about what do you think your parents did well? And you all can unmute yourselves and chime in.
My mom did the best she could with what she had. She was a single parent of 6. And there were some intermingling of disabilities in our family. There were a couple that had learning disabilities and a couple that were intellectual and maybe a schizophrenia, mental health disabilities. And she wrangled all of us by herself, you know, so I think she did the best she could with what she had. And I'm sure you've heard that saying, you do better when you know better type of situation. So I can kind of give her that. She did the best she could with what she had. And like I said earlier, we didn't have much, but we had a great childhood, I think.
Is your mom still alive?
Yeah, she is. She actually, the one sister that has an intellectual disability lives with her, and her children live with her. So she's had kids in her life for 54 years. And, you know, I can't even imagine, because I only have 2 kids and that's enough for me.
I think my brother was born in 1988. And, you know, thinking in hindsight, that's a pretty interesting time for a kid with a disability to be born, thinking about the ADA coming along in 1990. And I think that in some ways our family kind of backed into this, but I think that from a pretty early point, my mom in particular did a good job sort of making my brother's experience not just about an individual experience, but about kind of a kind of disability culture.
Yes.
The culture of people with disabilities, the culture of disability rights, the culture of disability advocacy. It was just always, it was never just my brother. It was about my brother for sure, but I always remember it being about more than just him. And I think that has, and we'll talk about this later, but I think that had a big impact on how I thought about his life, but also kind of about, you know, civil rights and the world around me. And so I think that's something that my family did really well.
I want to support what Nick is saying. Nick's mother, Sue Hetrick, is the executive director at the Center for Disability Empowerment, and she is a huge advocate. And my sister and I also had an advocate mother. And before all the stuff that's available today, a lot of it was a lot of phone calls, going into meetings. And I remember when my mom passed away, she asked me to do a couple of things. She said, I don't expect your brother to live with you. He's doing great where he is. He's independent. He gets his meals cooked. Someone pays his bills, those kind of things. But she did say, when you go visit him, not only advocate for him, but advocate for everybody that he lives with. So I'm thankful for her being an advocate. And sometimes we didn't know she was an advocate because of all the behind the scenes things she's done.
For my family, I would say they did a good job of keeping high expectations for my sister. When she was a kid, she wanted to be a ballerina and like 8 other things. And nobody ever said, you know, you're in a wheelchair, maybe ballerina's not the best dream. But they just let her dream and decide who she wanted to be. And I really appreciated that nobody ever like rained on her parade on that. She was just allowed to dream and come up with her own life path.
I think go ahead, Veronica.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think what my parents did well is Nick was included in everything. So it wasn't the two of you are going to do this and Nick won't. It was, we did everything as a family. And then when my mother became a single parent, it was, she would refer to us as the 3 of you. And we even signed cards, the 3 of us, and just our initials, because she saw us as a unit. And that's kind of the way we hung out, as a unit. Not that we didn't have our separate lives, but Nick was always included as part of the family and part of our lives.
My parents were also very supportive and did a good job raising us, if I do say so myself. And I do think that had a lot to do with both of us only being around in the past couple of decades. I can't even imagine what Frank's life would be like if he were born even just a few decades before he was, because things have come such a long way. There's still a very long way to go, but it just is amazing to think about what his life might have been like if he was born any earlier than he was, because really we don't know any different than inclusion. And of course he should have rights. And of course he deserves this and that and the other. We never realized that he didn't, because that was our whole lives. I always say that he's my only sibling. So I don't know any different but to have him as a sibling. And we don't know any different than today's world. And it's really humbling to think about how things might have happened in the past and how recent that was compared to where we are now and how much more work there is to be done.
You know, we grew up outside of Cleveland. We grew up in an inner ring suburb of Cleveland, and at the height of the civil rights movement. So I went to Heights High, which was a very liberal high school. And I would always tell Nick, you have rights, you have rights. And I didn't realize until I was a professional that Nick did not have rights. And that shocked me, absolutely shocked me, because I thought, I have rights, you have rights. And he did not.
I wanted to piggyback a thought I had on what Nikki was talking about advocating and the ballerina story and all. And it just kind of came to me while you were talking, is that our mom, both of our parents did a really good job, the best they could, for things to be normal. But what came to my mind was my mother was this beautiful dresser and stylish, and she always made sure that Deb and I looked nice and were neat and clean, but she also made sure Rodney was. And I can remember her talking about making sure that he was well dressed and had a good haircut, so that it was just one less thing, one less strike against him, you know, that if he could go to school looking well. And that really stuck with me. And when you were talking about that, it reminded me of her saying that, and that he looked like all the other little boys.
Okay, I want to share this picture. This is the only family photo that we have. It was taken in a church where they do the family church members, in a church where there was no programming or inclusion of my brother Rodney. That is probably the first time we ever wore a suit and tie. And so I'm thankful for that picture, but with my involvement with the faith-based communities, it's really important for the inclusion of all people and not special needs programming. So thanks you guys. Let's go ahead and go to the next question, all right?
Deb, really quick, I'm so sorry. We do have a question in the chat.
Okay.
If you'd like me to voice that for you all.
Okay.
This says, my question is for Veronica. Could you speak on how your brother being nonverbal affected your connection to your brother? About how, as a sibling, it is to connect when communication is a struggle?
Sure. I am a big believer that everything is communication. Usually when I tell people that he doesn't use words, they say, oh, how does he let you know? He lets me know. He will physically and emotionally and psychologically make me aware of what he wants, and he will find a way. So I think that the PECs that I mentioned are very helpful, as well as just getting to know him. And I think that us being together for 20 some years has created a relationship unlike anything else, that we understand and get each other. We have that sibling connection that I think all siblings have, but I think us especially. And I think his struggle to communicate has been pretty ongoing since he was born. And we've just gotten used to it and figured out how to get around it. And I think it's opened us up to even better communication, actually, because we're not listening to just words. We're watching body language, and we're making sure that his expression is right, making sure his brow's not furrowed in frustration or anything like that. It's made us more aware, and it's made us more observant. And I think that's the best way to get really holistic care of a person, is to take in all of those different things.
Thank you, Veronica. I know for Cathay and I, our brother was nonverbal all his life. And his very first school was called the Rosemary Kennedy School. So it was a special education school on Long Island, named after John F. Kennedy's sister, Rosemary. And I remember them saying, oh, he's going to talk, he's going to talk. And so they did not have a vision for other possible communications, such as sign language, or, you know, we didn't have a PEC system way back when. But, you know, even, and our brother, like yours, Veronica, we knew what he wanted, whether he pointed it or pulled it or helped himself. But it is a challenge for nonverbal siblings. It's a challenge for him. I believe a lot of his aggressive behavior towards us was out of frustration of not being able to tell us to stop or to listen or whatever. But, you know, I always usually share that, you know, although my brother never spoke a word in his 50 years of life, his life still speaks volumes through the work that we do, and including people, all people in the community. So it's a challenge to have a nonverbal person. It always is. All right, so let's go to the next question. So we were all being very, very kind, but I think we can be kinder. What do you wish your parents could do better?
I wish that my mom would have focused on post-secondary education a little bit more with some of them, because I feel like their lives might have turned out a little different if they had have gone on and sought out education beyond high school. They all did graduate high school, except for I think one of them, but they did not pursue college. And I know that even with a learning disability, they still could have went to college. And I think that would have made their lives a little bit different today. And it's on them too. I mean, it's not, I can't put it all on her, but I wish she would have been a little more, present with that. It was really never a topic in our household. It was, graduate high school and that was kind of it. And then once they got on their own and started working, they could have went on and pursued it themselves, but they didn't.
For my family, this comes from a conversation I had with my sister as an adult, and because I have a child with the same disability my sister had, she was really loading on advice to me early on, but she said, make sure your house is accessible. And that's not something that my family ever really did. There were elements and parts of the house that were accessible, but the whole house was never accessible to her in her chair. And that was really important to her, to feel like she belonged in our family, that she could move through the household. And so in our house, we blew open doors and, have made our house so that our son can travel through the house very well in his wheelchair. But that was one of the big pieces of advice my sister gave me that I wish my family had done.
I know for me, I wish that our parents had included us in the conversations. And not so much when we were little, but Deb and I, it was one of the things we talked about, said we were not included in any of the decision-making or helping us really understand what was going on. And so we really didn't have any ownership in the family unit. And we were as involved as they were as siblings. And I know for me, as I got older, I was kind of out of the loop a little bit. I left home before Deb did, by going to college and getting married. But I really wish, even in those middle school years and those high school years, that they had included us more.
I think that parents in general are very hesitant to burden their other children. And I think that it took a long time for my parents to come around. They wanted me to have my own life. And eventually they realized that my brother was part of my life and was always going to be. And I think once I got a bunch of degrees in disability and chose a career in disability and chose hobbies having to do with disability, then they kind of realized that I was sticking around, and then opened up to the idea. But I think it's nice that they didn't want me to feel like it was my job to deal with my sibling. They kind of let me pick for myself. And now that I am involved, I always say that they are too nice. We have to ask for so much for Frank, for his medical care, his schooling. We are always constantly asking, he needs more services, he needs this, he needs that. And we always have to ask for so much because he needs so much. He's a high needs kid. But that has meant that my mother always defaults to being polite and I don't want to push if it's not too much trouble. And I'm the one that breezes in and gets the bad rap because I'm saying, listen, this isn't working. We need this and this and this. And, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, she's here again. And that's okay with me because I think sometimes you got to do it.
Yeah, our mom was a pit bull.
No parolees though. I was looking at our panel here. 6 of us have chosen the field of disability. Nick, can you share what you wish your parents did better, and then maybe how Micah has impacted you in the career that you chose?
Yeah, well, I have to tread lightly on this question because my mom's the director of the CDE and she's also on the webinar right now. So, hey, Mom. I mean, I don't think this is any shock or secret, but I mean, I think that it would have been good. I think this is not just about my brother, but I think it would have been good to have more time one-on-one with my parents. We did things together, but there wasn't a whole lot of time spent sort of one-on-one connecting with my parents, and I think that would have been good. I think another thing that's kind of ongoing, and this is related to something I forget. I guess this is something Elaine was sort of touching on, the idea that my brother now is in his early 30s, and he graduated from high school and he has a couple jobs, but the sort of the full launch of him into independent living, we haven't quite gotten there. He lives with my mom and he's independent in some respects and not in others. And, my mom's dealing with that as a single parent, and it's not easy to do everything that she needs to do. And also, try to get him to a point where he could viably would want to, feels confident living on his own. I think that's something that is still a possibility, still something that we could aim for in the future. But I think it's, it's harder as time goes on to make that happen, to do what's needed to make that happen. As he's getting older, as my mom's getting older, as I've got young kids at home. So I don't know. I don't know how I would draw it up differently, or what it would have looked like or might look like in the future. But that's something that I don't know that we've totally nailed as a family. As far as career, I went to college and then went to graduate school in English at Ohio State and did a PhD in English. And I ended up specializing in disability studies in graduate school. I wrote a dissertation on disability and literature after the ADA. And so that was, obviously my brother's influence was sort of the seed of that adventure. And then after I finished graduate school, I taught high school English for a year and piloted a disability studies course at the Wellington School here in Columbus, which I'm sure has never been taught again after I left. And then I left there after a year and came on staff with a local church. And so now I teach classes and I'm a pastoral counselor for a church. And, so it's not a disability related field, strictly speaking. But obviously we're touching mental health concerns. We're working with people who are dealing with anxiety and depression and things like that. And I've had, some opportunities here and there in our church to give workshops about trying to incorporate people into, small groups and things like that. So yeah, all of that, of course, kind of starts with my brother. So. And my mom, of course.
Did I get everybody? I want to add on to what you say, Nick. I wish that we had one-on-one with our parents. Typically, if my father would help on the weekend. So my memories are him pushing a swing at a park and Kathy and I just trying to make some fun. So it always involved that. Or if my dad did anything with us, it would be taking us to the movies. And there's not a lot of communication that happens during a movie. And then the other thing is, my mom, when she did take us, it was typically shopping. And one thing I noticed that after she passed, I almost had an addiction to the shopping because I think it just reminded me of that one-on-one time with my mother. So I guess one piece of advice is when you do choose something to do with your children, the typical children, is to pick something that you can do for the rest of your life, whether it is go out to eat or something that's healthy, that's very doable. And most of us really want that one-on-one time, even if it's just for a half hour. So it doesn't have to be a whole day. I don't know if as kids we'd want a whole day. Okay, did I get everybody?
Deb, we have another question here in the chat.
Okay.
Before I read this question, I just wanted to share, you all have me thinking of my own experiences. And as I said, as we were setting up, I'm not a sibling, I am the person with a disability, but I'm thinking, how did that affect my family? And it makes me proud, but also a little bit sad because my mom, she actually got a degree in special education simply because the language that was being used during my ARD meetings were above her head, and they were almost treating her like she's dumb, she doesn't need to know this, the terminology, so we're just going to use these big words and not simplify it at all. And so she went to school to better understand the language, and it turned into, now she has a bachelor's in special education, a master's in special education, and then another master's in educational leadership. And just to think that that started with, she wasn't getting the support that she needed when dealing with my services and different accommodations and the meetings and stuff. So it makes me proud of her and all that she's accomplished, but it also makes me a little bit sad knowing why she did that.
Yes.
But with that, let me go ahead and read this question we have here in the chat. It says, I'm a parent of a 9-year-old with a rare genetic syndrome and ever-changing medical needs. My other children are 4 and 6. What advice does the panel have for dealing with trauma for young siblings based on your experience?
Well, I think Nikki could probably answer that one.
As a sibling and a parent of a child with a rare genetic condition, yes. Yeah, you know, one of the things that resonates with me from my own childhood is that my mom used to say to us, make sure you're nice to your sister because you don't know how long she's going to be with us. And that felt traumatic at the time. Like, it was scary. Like, are you telling me she's not going to make it? But I realized she was trying to make sure that we built that relationship and had an appreciation. And I think that's really the key of making sure your children have relationships with each other, and that it's not just about the disability and the stuff happening around the disability, but that they know each other and care about each other and have positive moments together. So to me, I think that would be the key, to make sure that there's a lot of positive to balance out that trauma that happens.
Thank you, Nikki.
I also consider, I don't know where you live, the person that asked the question, but a lot of organizations and hospitals, children's hospitals, run something called sib shops. So opportunities for younger sibs to get together and, in the context of fun, just talk about what it's like to be a sibling. And there's also books for children. And if you look at siblingleadership.org, I think is the website, there are books for different age levels and how to support different age levels of siblings.
I think also with the amount of events that are kind of family centric now, it's nice to go to something as a family that has the supports needed for your child with a disability. There's my brother has a visual impairment, and when we were younger, we would go every summer to Highbrook Lodge, which was run by the Cleveland Sight Center, and it had supports for him, but it also was so much fun that I didn't realize that it was a supported environment, I guess. So things like that just give the memory and the positive connotation and the good feelings that you want your kids to have while still encompassing everyone together as a family.
All right, so I just want to read something that I have a favorite sibling book called The Power of the Powerless, written by Christopher DeBink. And basically, he published this book, and thousands of people wrote about the powerless person. His brother is Oliver, and Oliver had severe multiple disabilities, and it was a routine that during family dinner, each person took the bowl up upstairs to feed their brother Oliver dinner. And he talked about how many girlfriends he would bring home, and it would be his turn to take the bowl of food up to Oliver and feed him, and how many of the girls either did not want to go upstairs to do that or were not comfortable with that process. And then he met his the woman of his life. She not only went up with him to feed Oliver, but she also asked if she could be the one feeding him. And his question was, which one would you marry? And so with that in mind, did your experience with your sibling impact major decisions in your life?
I chose not to have children until way later in life, just because I was the oldest of 6. And I sometimes was the second mom, always babysitting, always taken care of. And I just, when I got older, it was just time for me to do, go to school, do what I wanted to do, and live on my own. And I wasn't ready to have kids. So got married later in life and had kids later in life. Most of my siblings, because some of their disabilities and choices, they had kids when they were in their late teens. So I watched them, struggle with their children, being single or, being with the relationship for a while and it breaking up or whatever. And so I just chose to go a different route for me.
Similar for me, Elaine. I didn't get married till my late 20s and didn't have my son until my mid 30s because I had done all of that momming when I was younger, and I wasn't that interested in doing it very early on. But my sister also did have a big impact on my career choices, not directly, but a lot of my work has been in disability and in advocacy and healthcare advocacy, all of that stuff. And it's all kind of rolled up into one. So I feel like my whole life really has built the skills that help me do what I do in my career too. And I also married a man who was an intervention specialist. So yeah.
I think for me, of course, my choice not to have children, my partner choice was all impacted by what is their reaction when they meet Nick. But I also didn't realize how much it impacted when I went to buy my first new car. I went to the dealership with a friend, and the first thing I asked the dealer to do was open the trunk. And he goes, look at the seats, look at the color. It's really, look at the dash. And I said, could you please open the trunk? And he said, what? And I said, could you please open the trunk? Because I'm thinking I got to put a manual chair in that car and I got to get it in and out easily. And then when I bought my first house, I told the real estate agent, no more than 2 steps, have to have a full bathroom on the first floor. At which point she showed me a house that was on a hill with 14 steps to the back door and 6 or 7 to the front. And I went 2 to 3 steps. What about this house? 14 is not 2. So even things like that, obviously my career, my life partner, but also my houses and my vehicles. And even the clothes I wore. If I knew I was going to be taking care of Nick, I knew that I had to wear something that I could lift him, because I had to lift him. I'd have to go into public bathrooms with him. I mean, I couldn't be wearing cute little dresses. You know what I mean, women.
I can
Kathy,
I can go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
I actually went into special education, became an intervention specialist. I did that for 31 years, retired from that 10 years ago. But during that time, I also was the coordinator for the Special Olympics program for the school district I was with, and which was really rewarding. After I retired, my husband and I actually moved to North Carolina, where I live now, to plant a church. And when we were looking for our home, knowing that church was going to start in our home, we were very specific. When you were talking about the steps, it had to be accessible. And when you live near the beach, like we do, most homes are not accessible. You know, they're raised up, and we said, nope, it's got to be accessible, or at least that we could put a small ramp down. And yeah, our church was very small, so we didn't have any kind of programs or anything, but we welcomed anybody that came into our church, and it gave me an opportunity just to show people how to love people where they are and who they are and what they are when they came in. And I'm also on the board of a nonprofit now that does a lot with beach wheelchairs. And and what's very cool too is my daughter became a special education teacher and is the mother of my grandson has autism. So it's this generational thing, but the decision making all played into that. And I mentioned the story about my husband, you know, and you know, he had not really had a whole lot of exposure to individuals affected with disabilities, and he embraced it. And we didn't even give him a choice. With Special Olympics, he went to those track meets with me. He had to go to Ohio State and spend the night, especially with the boys, to make sure they took their showers and all. And he loved it. So it just helped him. And he was a police officer. So it even helped him in his line of work to be more understanding of when he went out working with the public.
Anyone else?
I think part of any romantic relationships that siblings have is going to be a mentorship program where you have to show them that, you know, this is how life is.
Yep.
And you can take it or leave it because this is my life. Yep. And, you know, usually it turns out okay.
But both Deb and I, we trained our husbands well to hide the coffee and the soda before he came to our homes.
Everything went into the trunk of our cars, including liquid soap, soda, coffee. Yeah.
We trained them.
What was that?
We trained them well.
Yeah, we did. All right, I have one more question, unless I missed somebody. Did someone else want to share anything? All right. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell your teenage self?
I guess I'm still thinking about our last question here. I was still vocal, but less so in high school about disability and disability advocacy. And Frank is also my only sibling. It didn't quite occur to me that not every family has a Frank and they might have neurotypical siblings. It didn't really click, didn't understand. And my high school boyfriend, I invited him to our house and I did not mention at all anything about Frank. So when he came in the door, there's Frank half naked, jumping up and down, playing his music, throwing toys. And I was like, oh, I wonder if I should have brought this up sooner. but I didn't say a word. I just like watched it play out. And, you know, just was the judge of that situation, like whether or not things would be okay. So I think that if anything, you know, I would tell myself to go with the flow and be more vocal, and that people have different life experiences that aren't centered around their sibling, which is still mind-boggling to me.
You know, when you said that about bringing him home, I had someone say that having a sibling with multiple disabilities or a high demand for their care is like having an alcoholic in the home. And I thought about that. You know, there were times when we could not bring our friends home. My brother's behaviors were disruptive, or plans changed. If he was having a meltdown, we didn't do whatever we were planning for the day. Or, you know, just for Kathy and I, having our brother be very violent. So when I heard that analogy, I thought, I've never been around an alcoholic, but it does make sense because our lives revolve a lot around that person. So I just wanted to share that.
Well, you're kind of
Right.
describing my life now because our daughter has autism and she can be volatile. So we kind of, my son is the only other sibling to her. So I'm sure he's experienced a lot of what everybody's been talking about. And when he was little, I really just made a priority to take him out and do one-on-ones with him because my husband worked nights and I worked days. So when she was at school, I would go take him out of his school for lunch, like every other Friday, just to do something. But I'm sure he probably, 'cause he can speak for himself, but I'm sure that he can, appreciate some of the things that have been said here tonight. And I know with you, like what you said, Veronica, we've always made him realize this is not his life. He does not need to take on this burden, but he did work for us for a little while through the county board as our provider, but he's not doing that right now. But so yeah, it's interesting to hear everybody. And I'm also thinking about him a lot while I'm listening to everybody's stories.
I think it's hard because I don't know, as a teenager, you're kind of thinking about the future, but not real clearly and not in a particularly non-narcissistic way. But I don't know. I was just thinking about what Barbara was saying earlier about the need for information and what someone was saying about being a part of the process sooner. I think assuming that I could get through to my teenage self, I might say something like, you should track what's going on with your brother and try to get just the lay of the land about what he needs, where to find it, and who to talk to, and whose phone number you need, and what you need to know about Medicaid. Like, you don't need to know the ins and outs. You're 17, whatever, you're gonna do your own thing. But like, just if you can just stick some of that in your back pocket, that would be good. I just think I wasn't tracking that, and there are times now where I'll find myself kind of like having this moment of panicked clarity, like, oh my God, what am I going to do if suddenly, I'm the man on the spot? And some of that's going to be unavoidable no matter what, but some of it is something that you could sort of equip yourself to do. So maybe it's not teen self, maybe it's like, mid-20s self, but so anyway, somewhere earlier than now, it would be good to have heard that.
For me, as someone who lost my sibling, I think teenage me, I wish I would have known to really enjoy her more. I'm able to kind of transition some of that energy into the care of my son and give him all that attention, but I wish I had more conversations. My sister was hilarious, and more time. And I wish I had thought about that in my teens and 20s, but I was busy being in my teens and 20s. But being able to appreciate her more would have been something that I would like, although we did have a great relationship.
I would say not to be a people pleaser, because it is a form of manipulation. I mean, I got the perks of being a good daughter because I did this, that. Where Cathay was wise, she sought outside the family for joy and friends and that kind of thing. So I think I would, hopefully wish I had someone speak into that, to say that it's not my job to parent my brother, to take all the responsibilities on.
But at the same time, I had to fight for that because
Yes.
Mom did not approve of that I was trying to be independent and trying to be not necessarily the person she wanted me to be, as far as being maybe a clone of her or whatever. And so it had its challenges trying to move beyond, where I went to college and then I didn't come back home. I got a job and it was, it was difficult, but Deb tended to take on this is all my responsibility, where I've had the guilt of moving out because it was on them, and our brother became more difficult behaviorally after I moved out. And then it would be like, oh, well, you should come back. You should come back for the weekend and help. And, I was married. So, so it had its own set of challenges, but I know that Deb took on a lot of the responsibility by choice, not because I don't think it was forced on her, but you almost felt obligated, I think.
Yep. And I think I was covering for you too.
Yeah, probably. Thank you. I say that many decades later.
Did we get everybody what you would say to your teens though?
Well,
Okay.
I think there's two things. I think growing up when we did, I'm almost glad that I didn't know that he didn't have rights. When I would say, you do have rights, you can choose, you can do this. So I'm glad I was ignorant and that I did push that he could decide and he could do things. But I also think I did not leave home because my mom was single at that point and that just wouldn't work. But I still said, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go to school. I'm gonna, be a speech pathologist. I'm gonna blah, 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 blah. So even though she said, I don't think so, I kind of rebelled in place.
Yeah.
I'm thankful for that. Well, I want to thank all of you for being on this panel. Is there anything else anyone wants to share? I'm
I'm going to say,
let
me just say from the mental health side of things, if anybody's listening that has maybe a family member that maybe they went down a wrong path and you can't bring them back, just do not feel guilty about going on with your life and doing what you have to do. And that, you can't take on everybody's burden and take on all that. That's one thing that I really want to stress for people that are, if they're struggling with a sibling or a family member that has a mental health challenge and they're adults and you have your own family, don't feel guilty and don't feel that you have to take on that burden.
Well, we have a lifespan of a sibling resources pages. If you've not received a copy with, through email, let us know. If you want a copy of the different books, whether they're related to adults or children. And I think we only have like 8 minutes. So if we want to open up to Q&A, let's go ahead and do that.
We do have a few questions here. Let's see. We do have one here that says, what do you do as adults now to maintain a relationship with your sibling?
Well, Kathy and I were talking about that. The feeling of guilt when you can't see your sibling because you're working or you have a young family or whatever. There is a guilt that I think you put on yourself. But if we looked at our siblings like we would typical siblings, they would move out, they would have lives, they wouldn't have time for us. So it's a challenge of feeling guilty when you can't be like you were when you lived at home.
Let's see. And then we have a couple here in the Q&A. It says, being a sibling, what are 1 or 2 things that you wish your parents would have discussed with you early enough that would have helped shape your life?
Mm.
Well, I think some of us have already said that, if they would have talked to us more openly about the future, their plans, even, most adult siblings have said, I wish they would have just told me some stuff. Just tell me what do you have a plan? What is the plan? Is there a trust? What does the will say? Where is it? What are you thinking? And to be included in those conversations or to know where the information is. And there are some resources that, the ARC has a website that you can put in that information and it's password protected so that anybody in the family with that password can put information in and then go see it so that it is available for anybody. And I think the other thing is, going back a question, we need to realize that all sibling relationships have ups and downs, and so do relationships when your brother or sister has a disability. You go away to college, you set up your own life, and then you come back, maybe, but not Cathay. And then, and then, so it's not going to be, why don't you maintain that relationship? Because nobody does. Think about it. You veer off, you set up your own autonomy, you set up your own families, you come back, you separate again as life impacts. And I think we have to just recognize that and be kind to ourselves. And Elaine, I'm so glad that you said that we should not feel responsible for everything, and the other piece is we don't like our siblings all equally. For those of us that have more than one, there's some that you're very close with and some that you're like, yeah, nice to see you. See you next Christmas or whatever.
I can attest to that for sure.
I think just on the point about not feeling guilty or over responsible on this question about what parents can say to their kids. I mean, I think having you can just assume probably that the neurotypical or non-disabled sibling feels a level of responsibility, feels a level of obligation, feels a level of, care, and it may be, overdeveloped or, over responsible or whatever. But I think if you just assume that and then have frank conversations that are appropriate to the age that your other kids are, here's what it takes. Here's what I am and I'm not expecting of you. Here's what I would like, but realize you might not choose to do. It kind of goes to your point there too, Deb, about about being a people pleaser. I think parents can help kids not do that by being clear about their expectations versus their desires. And I mean, one thing I tell people in counseling all the time is whatever you do, make sure that you're doing it on purpose. And I think there's probably some application of that here too, where, a parent of a child with a disability might hope or want another kid to do or not do something. But, I think you kind of have to put that in your kid's hands and say, you're going to have to be the one who decides what you do with this request or this information or this sense of responsibility that you have that ultimately, only you can manage, And
I think the other thing is I've heard young siblings, and I mean 8-year-olds, say, well, I'm going to grow up, I'm going to get married, and my husband and I are going to buy a house, and there's going to be a bedroom for us on this side, and there's going to be a bedroom for my brother on this side, and there'll be one kitchen because, he can't cook, but he'll have his own family room. And I'm like, that's a 7-year-old. She's already assumed her path in life and the responsibility.
Right.
And so I guess if there's one thing to say to parents is don't assume that this is going to come up in adulthood. Kids at very young ages have already mapped out what they think their life might be like. And so having those frank conversations at the level that they can have, I almost died when I heard her say that. I thought, oh my gosh, she doesn't have her own life. She's already seen her life view as being her brother's caregiver. And that's just overwhelming for a kid.
Barbara, that was my story. And when my brother's physical behaviors became so bad, I realized that dream of him living with me ended. And so I grieved that. I had held on to that picture for years. So that was my 8-year-old story.
We do have a couple more questions here. So we do have, I'll summarize them. One asking for advice. Her daughter is in a new relationship, her first relationship, and has not had her boyfriend over. Any advice on how to handle this in a open and respectful way? And then I do want to read this last one here. For Veronica or others who are the only, forgive me for not knowing acronyms, the only TD sibling, do you have anyone or any agency you turn to to rely on for support, given that you don't have any other TD siblings? And thank you for clarifying that that meant typically developing. I am so sorry.
I think, well, first of all, the attendee who's asking about their stepdaughter, that's so wonderful that you're thinking about that, because that could be happening and she might not even realize that that's why she's hesitating. I think that as she gets older, it'll be just a part that she accepts. But something my parents did was they would offer, do you want to have somebody over on Friday? And, we're going to give Frank this new toy and he's going to hang out in his room. So you guys can have the basement. Like, they would always make sure to come up with some sort of contingency plan. So if, we didn't all want to sit in the living room and listen to Frank's Baby Einstein DVD, we could have separate areas and we could be apart and distance. And just having them mention that was really nice, because it kind of made me feel like it was okay to not want him around all the time. So to kind of give permission like that was really important.
I have one more comment that was taken out of chat. How do we maintain relationships with our SIBs as we get older? I know for my brother with severe DD, nonverbal autism, I remembered wanting to take him out to do things because I thought he would love it. And it ended up being a battle. He hit me in the car, or, it was really ugly. And I remember a staff support person said, why don't you serve him in the way that he wants to be served? And that meant going out for Wendy's, double burgers, drink, everything, messy and all. But he was a happy camper. So I had to almost die to that as well, and come to peace with that's what makes him happy.
Yes.
So with this in
yourself, or are you doing it for them? Yeah.
Exactly. Again, people pleasing. I'm working on it. I am. So I want to thank the panel tonight for joining us, all of you. I just care about each one of you. We connect because of our stories, and we hope that we've reached out to people in the audience who are either siblings or have that possible divine appointment to meet a sibling and talk about and encourage them with what we've learned in life. So I just thank you all for joining us tonight. We will have this edited and will be on the Center for Disability Empowerment YouTube channel once we get it prettied up and ready to go. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you at the next workshop. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. So nice to meet you all.
You too.